cargo truck rolls toward a restricted quarantine checkpoint where hazmat crews immediately spray it down with disinfectant. Curious and slightly annoyed, the driver asks what's happening. One worker casually explains there's been a small chemical spill in the biotech complex nearby and assures him it's under control. The truck continues down the road. When the driver bends to grab his ringing phone, he accidentally strikes something. He steps out and finds a deer lying motionless. Seeing no damage to his vehicle, he drives off, leaving the animal behind. Moments later, the deer's lifeless body twitches and then rises unnaturally. Elsewhere, fund manager Seok-woo is at his office, finalizing a stock deal over the phone. As he scans online headlines about unexplained fish deaths in a local reservoir, his assistant enters with updates. Trusting his instincts, Seok-woo quickly orders the sale of shares tied to the biotech company connected to the incident. After work, he argues with his ex-wife over the phone while parking his car. Their daughter Soo-eun wants to visit her mother in Busan for her birthday. Seok-woo is reluctant to let her travel alone, brushing it off as inconvenient timing due to his workload. At home, his mother greets him warmly. He finds Soo-eun in her room speaking softly to her mom, insisting she can take the train by herself. She quickly hangs up when she sees him. Trying to make up for his absence, Seok-woo gives Soo-eun her birthday gift early. Unfortunately, it's the same present he gave her before. Disappointed but polite, she tells him the only thing she really wants is to see her mother. She even offers to travel alone so she won't disrupt his busy schedule. Later, Seok-woo's mother gently scolds him, reminding him that while his career may be at a critical point, so is his daughter's childhood. She leaves him with a camcorder recording of Soo-eun's recital, one he missed. Watching the footage and seeing his daughter's heartbreak finally pushes him to change his mind. He decides to take her to Busan himself. The next morning, father and daughter head to the station. On the road, Seok-woo attempts to turn her recital into a lesson about competition and success. Suddenly, an ambulance speeds past, followed by emergency vehicles racing toward the city. Ash drifts down from the sky, and in the reflection of their windshield, distant smoke rises. At the train station, the high-speed train to Busan prepares to depart. Conductors and attendants take their positions. A high school baseball team boards with loud chatter and excitement. Two elderly sisters share snacks while chatting. Seok-woo and Soo-eun settle into their seats, and he calls work to say he'll return before lunch. Just before departure, a young woman with a wounded leg sprints onto the train unnoticed. As the train pulls away, Soo-eun glimpses a violent struggle on the platform, a man attacking a station employee. Inside the train, the injured girl limps through the cars. Meanwhile, a nervous passenger informs an attendant about a strange man hiding in the restroom, muttering that everyone is dead. Curious, Soo-eun wanders down the aisle. The frightened man in the bathroom keeps repeating that it's too late and that people are dying outside. The attendant tries to calm him, assuming he's unstable. In another car, the injured woman collapses on the floor, convulsing violently while most passengers remain distracted. When Soo-eun heads toward a restroom, she is redirected by a tough-looking man named Sang-hwa, who is guarding the door for his pregnant wife. In the meantime, an attendant discovers the injured woman writhing uncontrollably and calls for medical assistance. Within seconds, the woman's body twists grotesquely, and she transforms. Seok-woo wakes from a brief nap to find Soo-eun missing. His assistant calls to warn him that violent outbreaks are being reported across the country. Panic spreads through the train as passengers watch chaotic news footage on overhead screens. Suddenly, the transformed woman attacks the attendant, biting her savagely. The infection spreads instantly. One by one, passengers are overwhelmed. The baseball players are attacked mid-conversation. Screams echo through the narrow train cars as victims turn within seconds, lunging at anyone nearby. The chief attendant tries to organize an escape, urging passengers in the next carriage to run. Seok-woo searches desperately for his daughter while witnessing the horrifying chain reaction. Soo-eun hears the chaos drawing closer. The one-sorterly train descends into madness. The infected swarm through the aisles like a tidal wave of bodies. Just as the chief attendant is overtaken and transforms, Soo-eun finds her father. Without hesitation, Seok-woo grabs her hand. Together, they sprint down the aisle as a growing horde of frenzied, infected passengers chases them through the speeding train, the nightmare only just beginning. Sang-hwa urges his pregnant wife, Seong-kyung, to move faster when he spots movement at the end of the car. Ahead of them, a woman is suddenly dragged down and bitten. Despite the danger, Seong-kyung pleads with him to help. Sang-hwa steps in without hesitation, but the infected attacker lunges at him as well. Meanwhile, Seok-woo rushes into the next carriage. Thinking quickly, Sang-hwa shoves one of the infected into a restroom and locks it inside. He tells his wife to run ahead, but more of the creatures begin flooding down the aisle. Passengers in the safer cars are still glued to the overhead screens, watching news of riots and chaos, unaware of how close the danger has come. Survivors from the infected carriage pound on the connecting door. Seok-woo hesitates only a second before pulling it shut, the door slamming inches from Seong-kyung's face. Furious but focused, Sang Hwa fights off another attacker and forces his way inside with his wife just before the horde can break through. They quickly realize something important. The infected don't understand how to operate the doors. Even more crucial, they seem to react only when they see movement. Acting on instinct, Seong-kyung covers the glass panel in the door, blocking the creature's line of sight. The pounding slows. The monsters calm, confused. Over the intercom, the conductor announces that the train will skip the next scheduled stop. Dong-seok angrily contacts him, demanding to know whether he's aware of what's happening on board. The conductor insists he's following orders from central control. Seok-woo's phone rings. It's his mother. She's frightened and tells him to protect Soo-won no matter what. In the middle of their conversation, her voice changes. A sudden commotion, a scream, and the line goes dead. Seok-woo understands immediately, but he keeps the truth from his daughter. As the train slows while passing a station, desperate civilians outside bang against the windows, begging for help. Seconds later, infected figures swarm them. The passengers watch in horror as the scene unfolds. A televised government address interrupts the programming. An official calmly describes the situation as violent unrest affecting several major cities. Districts have been sealed off. Citizens are urged to remain indoors and ignore unverified reports. The official reassures the public that everything is under control, even as footage shows cities engulfed in flames. Inside the train, fear spreads just as fast as the infection. Social media feeds fill with graphic videos of attacks. Another announcement declares a national state of emergency. Soo-won tells her father that her mother's phone isn't connecting. Seok-woo sits her down gently while pretending to try again. Nearby, one of the elderly sisters insists the other sit beside them, and Soo-won kindly gives up her own seat. Sang Hwa, still resentful about the door being shut earlier, eyes Seok-woo coldly. When Soo-won explains why she gave up her seat, her father quietly scolds her. He tells her that in moments like this, survival comes first, that she must look after herself before anyone else. His words clash sharply with her natural kindness. Another announcement. The train will stop at the next major station, where military forces have reportedly secured the area. Overhearing Dong-seok speaking urgently on his phone, Seok-woo learns that not all cities are safe, and their destination might not be among the secured ones. He tells Soo-won to stay put and moves to another car to make a private call. Sang Hwa chats with Soo-won and asks about her father's job. When she says he manages investments, Sang Hwa jokingly calls him a professional bloodsucker. Even Soo-won shyly agrees. Seong-kyung eases the tension by offering candy and inviting Soo-won to greet her unborn baby. Soo-won gently touches her belly and feels a kick, a small spark of life in the middle of disaster. Seok-woo contacts a client he believes has influence. The man confirms that once they arrive, strict quarantine measures will be in place. Desperate, Seok-woo asks for help, offering favors in return. The client quietly advises him not to head toward the main square, but instead to go to the East Plaza, promising to alert his associates there. He notices the homeless man from earlier listening nearby. When the train pulls into the station, the platform is eerily silent. No soldiers, no visible security. Dong-seok forces his way off first, urging others to follow. Seok-woo takes Soo-won's hand and steps onto the empty platform. The surviving baseball players exit gripping their bats. An attendant guides the conductor toward the infected carriage to assess the situation. Dong-seok intercepts them, claiming Busan may be one of the last operational cities. He suggests detaching the infected car entirely, but technical limitations make it impossible. The conductor decides they should proceed directly to Busan, but first they must gather the remaining passengers. The group moves cautiously into the deserted station. Seok-woo leads Soo-won into a restricted corridor to head toward the East Plaza, the homeless man trailing behind after overhearing the phone call. Soo-won wants to warn the others, but her father refuses, prioritizing their escape. She looks crushed by his decision. Meanwhile, the rest of the passengers descend a long escalator. Sang Hwa senses something wrong. The silence feels unnatural. Down a separate hallway, a lone uniformed officer appears ahead of Seok-woo and Soo-won. The homeless man suddenly bolts toward him. Seok-woo tells Soo-won to stay put and follows. At the base of the escalator, the truth is revealed in horrifying fashion. The station soldiers are already infected. Their heads snap up in unison before they charge. Chaos erupts. The horde crashes into the descending passengers. Sang Hwa reacts instantly, shielding his wife and forcing her back up the stairs. In the hallway, Seok-woo's client calls again, saying he cannot reach his contacts. Behind the officer, a shadow moves and a zombie lunges, tearing into him. The homeless man slips to the ground as more infected swarm the corridor, devouring the fallen soldier. The station, once silent, explodes into screams. Seok-woo sprints back toward Suwon just as a zombie lunges for her. Before it can reach her, Sang Hwa barrels in and slams it aside. Seong-kyung grabs Suwon, and the four of them bolt for the train. The surviving baseball players are waiting at the carriage door, shouting for them to hurry. As soon as they pile inside, the door is yanked shut. Behind them, Seok-woo wrestles with an infected attacker that nearly drags him down. The homeless man suddenly intervenes, pulling the creature away and clearing a path. He dashes for the door. Seeing him, Sang Hwa reopens it and holds it wide enough for Seok-woo to squeeze through. Together, they shove the door closed and fight to secure the lock as infected bodies slam against the glass. On the platform, Seong-kyung hesitates for a second when she sees other passengers being overwhelmed by the growing horde. There's no time to think. She runs down the stairs with Suwon and the elderly sister. At the same time, survivors from the opposite side of the station scramble into another carriage. Without warning, infected soldiers smash through station windows and crash down onto the train roof and platform. One zombie tumbles directly onto Jong-gil, but its body is too mangled from the fall to bite her. Seong-kyung pulls Suwon and the other sister in the opposite direction, while a zombie staggers after them. Jong-gil is saved at the last second by an attendant and the team's cheerleader, who drag her inside before the doors slam shut. In another carriage, Seong-kyung and the others manage to pull the homeless man inside just as the infected swarm the steps. The train is quickly surrounded. Yeon-suk coldly insists they must depart immediately if they want any chance to survive. The cheerleader protests, her friends are still outside, but the attendant reluctantly contacts the conductor and tells him to move. Back at the stairwell, Sang Hwa finally secures the door. The horde crashes through nearby glass panels and pours forward. Seeing the train begin to move, the men sprint toward it. At the base of the stairs, two baseball players are seized and dragged away. The last remaining player freezes in terror, but Seok-woo grabs him and forces him to run. They leap aboard just in time. Sang Hwa lags behind. Seok-woo reaches out to pull him up, but instead Sang Hwa snatches a riot shield and baton from a fallen soldier and uses them to fend off the lunging zombies. He fights his way inside moments before the doors seal. Inside the cab, the conductor contacts Central Control, asking if the railway to Busan is still open. He's told to proceed, but he anxiously requests updates from any stations ahead. Elsewhere on the train, Seong-kyung and her group find themselves trapped between two infected-filled carriages. Spotting a restroom, she signals everyone inside. They cram into the tiny space. Just as she steps in, a zombie slams into her. They barely manage to force the door shut as infected bodies pile against it. In another carriage, passengers cover the glass doors with clothing and newspapers. An announcement echoes through the train. They are heading directly to Busan without further stops. The cheerleader receives a heartbreaking call from the surviving baseball player. He apologizes, the rest of the team didn't make it. At the same time, Seok-woo desperately tries to reach Suwon, only to hear Sang Hwa's voice on his phone. They're trapped in a restroom in car 13. The baseball player confirms that additional survivors are stranded in car 15. The men decide to mount a rescue. Sang Hwa quickly outlines a plan. He'll lead, shield first. The baseball player will stay in the middle. Seok-woo will guard the rear. They'll wait for a tunnel. Darkness seems to confuse the infected. As soon as they enter the next car, the zombies spot them and charge. Sang Hwa smashes through them with raw force, using his fists and shield. Seok-woo fights from the side, while the baseball player swings his bat wildly. They move like a unit, pushing forward step by step. The next carriage is packed with infected teammates in uniforms. The sight paralyses the boy. Sang Hwa shoves him aside and tackles the attackers head-on. Seok-woo grabs another bat and joins in. The fight becomes a brutal stalemate. Then the train plunges into a tunnel. Instantly, the zombies falter, disoriented in the darkness. Seok-woo bangs the bat loudly against a pole, drawing the infected toward the sound. Using the distraction, they slip past. As daylight returns, the zombies regain their senses and attack again, forcing the men to retreat between cars. Catching their breath, Seok-woo comes up with another idea. When the next tunnel approaches, they move through the darkness again. This time, Seok-woo tosses Sang Hwa's phone toward the back of the carriage and calls it. The ringing echoes in the pitch black. The zombies swarm toward the sound, allowing the trio to advance without fighting. They finally reach the restroom and reunite with their loved ones. Relief washes over them, briefly. The baseball player finds another bathroom nearby. Timing the next tunnel, he guides more survivors into hiding. Seok-woo calculates the intervals between tunnels with precision. The boy texts the cheerleader in car 15, telling her they're coming. She shares the hopeful news. Dong-seok, however, is alarmed. He insists the approaching group could be infected. Several passengers agree. Fear outweighs reason. The cheerleader pleads with the attendant to support them, but he sides with Dong-seok. When the train enters another tunnel, the group leaves the restrooms. Now they must cross a carriage filled with infected. They climb onto the overhead luggage racks, crawling silently above the zombies. Seok-woo deliberately drops down first, drawing attention. The infected shuffle toward him, giving the others a chance to descend safely. They move into the next car. Suddenly, the homeless man stumbles. Seok-woo turns back to help him. The train exits the tunnel, light floods in. They're stranded in full view of the horde. Seok-woo counts down under his breath, waiting for the next tunnel. Just as they prepare to sprint, the homeless man accidentally crushes a soda can underfoot. The sharp metallic crunch echoes. Heads snap toward them. They run. Claws swipe inches from their backs. They manage to dive through the connecting door, but a zombie's body wedges into the frame. Sang-hwa braces himself against the door, holding it shut with sheer strength as the infected push from the other side. And the pressure keeps building. The surviving baseball player pounds on the door to car 15, calling out to the cheerleader. But the passengers inside have barricaded it, refusing to open up. They silence the girl when she tries to tell them who's outside. Behind them, Sang-hwa strains against the door he's holding shut, his muscles trembling as infected bodies slam against it. Seok-woo rushes to reinforce him, while the baseball player desperately tries to break through the next door. Then it happens. A zombie forces its arm through the narrow gap and sinks its teeth into Sang-hwa's side. The men finally manage to shatter the door to car 15. The baseball player tries to rush in, but Dong-seok blocks the entrance, shouting that they might be infected. Inside, Jong-gil and the cheerleader struggle against the panicked passengers who are helping Dong-seok hold the door closed. Seong-kyung moves toward her husband, but Sang-hwa stops her with a firm shout. He tells her to stay back. He tells Seok-woo to take her and go. He can't hold much longer. With fading strength, he asks Seok-woo to protect his wife and unborn child. Seok-woo, shaken, apologizes. The door begins splintering under the pressure of the horde. Sang-hwa gives one final push, holding the infected at bay with raw strength. The others finally manage to pull Seong-kyung inside. Sang-hwa remains behind, fighting until he is swallowed by the swarm. Seok-woo grabs Soo-won and Seong-kyung and forces them into the carriage. He tries to reach Gil, but he's too late. The door slams shut. Rage takes over. Seok-woo lunges at Dong-seok, calling him a coward. Dong-seok immediately twists the narrative, accusing Seok-woo of being infected. The frightened attendant orders the new arrivals into the small vestibule between cars. One by one, the passengers of car 15 demand they leave. The homeless man steps out first. The cheerleader refuses to abandon the baseball player and joins him. Seong-kyung, not wanting to endanger others, tells Soo-won they should go too. Seok-woo reluctantly follows. The remaining passengers seal the vestibule doors behind them. Inside car 15, Jong-gil locks eyes with her sister, now fully turned, on the other side of the glass. Overcome with grief, she opens the door before anyone can stop her. The infected flood in, overrunning the carriage in seconds. Meanwhile, the conductor tries contacting Busan for confirmation of safety. No answer comes, only the sight of smoke and flames in the distance. For the first time since the chaos began, Seok-woo kneels before Soo-won and speaks gently. He promises he will get her to her mother for her birthday. Later, his assistant calls. Busan appears to have the strongest defensive perimeter left, but there's something worse. The outbreak began at one of the companies Seok-woo had financial ties to. The train screeches to an abrupt halt. A massive derailment blocks the tracks ahead. The conductor announces he will search for another locomotive to transport the remaining survivors to Busan. Amid the wreckage, Dong-seok and the attendant have somehow survived. The conductor checks the nearest train, only to find it filled with infected. He continues searching and finally locates an empty engine. Dong-seok and the attendant hide in a restroom. When zombies close in, Dong-seok coldly pushes the attendant into them as a distraction and escapes alone. A burning vehicle crashes into the tangled trains, splitting the survivors apart. The baseball player pulls the cheerleader into a carriage and tries to secure it. Dong-seok suddenly appears, shoving the girl toward the infected to save himself. The baseball player fights off the attacker, but it's too late. The cheerleader turns in his arms and bites him. Elsewhere, Soo-won wakes Seok-woo. He, Seong-kyung, and the homeless man are trapped beneath a tilted train car crawling with infected. Yeon-suk sprints toward the moving engine. When the conductor reaches to help him aboard, Yeon-suk abandons him without hesitation. The wreckage begins collapsing further. Seok-woo forces open a narrow escape route. As he turns to help the others through, debris shifts and seals the gap. Zombies smash through nearby windows. The homeless man sacrifices himself, holding the creatures back so the others can flee. Seok-woo pries the opening wider. He and the two women crawl out, leaving the man behind. They chase after the slowly moving engine. The infected swarm after them, piling over one another in mindless pursuit. Seok-woo helps Seong-kyung and Soo-eun climb aboard. Zombies cling to the exterior, dragging themselves up. With desperate kicks and blows, Seok-woo knocks them off one by one. Inside the cab, they expect to find the conductor, but instead discover Yeon-suk, half-transformed. He manages to unlock the cabin door before the infection fully overtakes him. Seok-woo warns them he's turning. Yeon-suk lunges. Seok-woo fights him off while Seong-kyung helps pull him away. In the struggle, Yeon-suk bites Seok-woo. The realization settles heavily. Seok-woo chains Yeon-suk to the controls and throws him off the moving train. Then he sees the bite on his own arm. Quietly, he locks himself to the railing to buy time. He guides Seong-kyung through operating the brakes and tells her how to reach Busan safely. He kneels in front of Soo-eun, telling her to stay brave and protect the baby. She clings to him, sobbing, refusing to let go. Before the infection takes his mind, Seok-woo gently frees himself from her grip and steps outside the cabin. As the virus overtakes him, he remembers the day Soo-eun was born, the first time he held her. With that final memory, he throws himself from the train. The engine eventually slows due to another blockade. Seong-kyung and Soo-eun disembark, walking through smoke, rubble, and bodies. They enter a dark tunnel leading toward Busan. On the other side, soldiers take aim. A sniper has them in his sights but hesitates. He cannot determine whether they're infected. An order comes through to eliminate them. Just then, Soo-eun begins singing the song from her recital, the one her father never heard in person. Her clear, trembling voice echoes through the tunnel. The soldiers lower their weapons. Survivors are approaching. At first glance, Train to Busan looks like the kind of movie you think you already understand. A speeding train, a sudden outbreak, passengers trapped inside, relentless tension from start to finish. And yes, it absolutely delivers that intensity. It has the urgency. It has the overwhelming surge of infected. It has the desperate movement through narrow train cars, the pounding on sealed doors, the sudden bursts of confrontation, and that constant feeling that safety can disappear in a single second. But what makes Train to Busan so powerful is that it refuses to remain just a genre film. Because underneath the outbreak, underneath the fear, underneath all the frantic survival action, this film is really about people. It's about what fear does to human beings. It's about how quickly society can collapse, not only physically, but morally. And that's where the movie becomes far more compelling than a standard thriller. Most outbreak-driven films are built around one central question: who survives? But Train to Busan keeps asking a much harder question: what kind of person do you become when survival is all that matters? That's the real engine of the story. The infected are terrifying, yes, but they're not the only threat. Again and again, the film shows that panic creates another kind of danger, not the one rushing down the aisle. Not the one crashing against the glass, but the one inside the human mind. Fear, self-preservation, herd mentality, cowardice, the instinct to protect yourself first and justify it later. That's what gives the film its weight. Because this isn't just a story about people escaping from infected threats. It's a story about human behavior under pressure. When systems fail, when authority becomes ineffective, when rules stop meaning anything, people begin to reveal who they really are. Some become brave, some become harsh, some become self-focused, some become selfless. And the brilliance of Train to Busan is that it keeps all of that inside a fast-moving genre framework. It never stops being entertaining. It never stops being intense. It never loses that edge-of-your-seat momentum. But while it's gripping you on the surface, it's also quietly examining something much deeper underneath. This is why the film feels bigger than its premise. On paper, Outbreak on a Train sounds almost too simple, but the movie turns that simple setup into a moving portrait of social collapse. The infection spreads rapidly, of course, but so does panic, so does selfishness. So does distrust, so does the willingness to push others aside just to feel safe for one more moment. And that's why the film resonates beyond genre fans. Even if someone doesn't care about outbreak stories or genre conventions, they can still connect to what this movie is really saying. Because the fear here is recognizable. The chaos feels recognizable. The way crowds react, the way misinformation spreads, the way people cling to survival while losing their sense of empathy, all of that feels uncomfortably real. That's what elevates the film. It understands that tension works best when it reflects something true, and Train to Busan is filled with truth, not in a literal sense, but in an emotional one. It understands families under strain. It understands public panic. It understands self-serving leadership. It understands how fast decency can fade when people believe there isn't enough safety to go around. That's why the movie hits harder than expected. You go in expecting suspense. You stay for the emotional and moral tension, because the film doesn't just ask whether the characters can make it through the crisis. It asks whether they can do so without losing their humanity. And that's a much more powerful idea. That's also why the movie never feels empty. A lot of thrillers deliver adrenaline, but once they're over, they fade. Train to Busan lingers. It lingers because the tension isn't only in the infected bodies. It's in the choices people make. It's in the fear that turns strangers against each other. It's in the social instinct to divide, exclude, and protect ourselves at someone else's expense. The outbreak creates the pressure, but the people create the tragedy. And that is exactly why this film becomes more than just another entry in a crowded subgenre. It becomes a story about morality, a story about compassion, a story about what happens when civilization becomes so fragile that all that remains is instinct. And then the film asks the most uncomfortable question of all. When everything falls apart, will instinct bring out our humanity, or reveal how easily we can lose it? That's what makes Train to Busan more than a typical thriller. It's not just about the crisis unfolding, it's about the living being tested, and in the end, that's far more unsettling. Most outbreak-driven films give their characters one crucial advantage: space, wide streets, open landscapes, multiple escape routes. Even in chaos, there's always the illusion that you can run. Train to Busan takes that illusion and completely removes it, because this story places its characters inside one of the worst possible environments for survival: a moving train. A sealed, speeding metal corridor with nowhere to go, and that single decision transforms everything. From the moment the crisis begins, the setting stops being just a location and becomes the film's greatest tool. Every carriage is no longer just part of the train, it's a zone of conflict. Every door becomes a critical decision. Every narrow aisle becomes a bottleneck. Every step forward feels like stepping into uncertainty. You're not watching characters move through a world, you're watching them fight for inches. And that's what makes the tension feel so suffocating. Because unlike open-world stories where danger can sometimes be avoided, here, danger is always right next to you. There's no distance, no safe boundary, no time to think, just pressure, proximity, and panic closing in from both directions. What's brilliant is how the film constantly redefines the same space. A train should feel repetitive. Same corridors, same doors, same layout, but it never does, because each carriage introduces a new challenge. One moment, it's a sealed safe zone. The next, it's a trap. One moment, it's protection. The next, it's a point of no return. And the film plays with that constantly. Dark tunnels suddenly remove visibility for everyone. Broken windows create new vulnerabilities. Locked doors become moral dilemmas: who gets in and who gets left outside. That's where the suspense becomes more than physical. It becomes psychological, because the most difficult part isn't always what's behind the door, it's the decision to open it, or not. The confined setting forces characters into impossible choices. You can't outrun the situation. You can't hide forever. You can't isolate yourself from others. You are surrounded by strangers, and you don't know which one is more dangerous: the infected or the person standing next to you. That's where the film becomes truly intense, because space doesn't just limit movement, it exposes people. There's nowhere to escape morally, no room to pretend. Every action happens in front of others. Every decision is witnessed. Every self-serving choice echoes instantly, and the train amplifies all of it. It's constantly moving forward, but the characters feel completely trapped. That contradiction creates a unique kind of tension, motion without escape. The world is passing by outside the window, but inside, everything is falling apart. The film also uses scale brilliantly. At times, you see the train from the outside, cutting through landscapes, racing toward its destination. It feels fast, it feels powerful, but then it cuts back inside, and suddenly that speed means nothing. Because inside those compartments, people are cornered. Even the infected benefit from this environment. They don't just chase, they overwhelm spaces. They surge forward together. They crash into barriers. They move like a force with nowhere to disperse. And in a confined space, that force becomes nearly impossible to contain. That's what makes the action so different from typical outbreak films. It's not about distance, it's about proximity. It's about how long you can hold a door, how quickly you can move through a single carriage, how many seconds you have before the space around you gives way. And this is why the tension never drops. Because the environment itself never relaxes, there's no safe zone for long, no location stays secure, no space stays neutral. Everything can turn against you instantly. By the time the film reaches its later stages, the train doesn't feel like a setting anymore. It feels like a system designed to push people to their limits, a moving test of survival, where every compartment asks a new question. How far are you willing to go? Who are you willing to leave behind? And what does survival even mean when there's nowhere left to run? That's the genius of Train to Busan. It doesn't just use a confined setting, it transforms it into a source of intensity. It turns limitation into pressure. It turns space into constant uncertainty. And it proves something that most thrillers forget: you don't need a massive world to create tension. Sometimes all you need is a narrow corridor, a locked door, and the sound of something getting closer. Every great thriller begins with a simple idea, something clear, something direct. Something that feels almost too familiar until it suddenly isn't. Train to Busan starts exactly like that. A father, a daughter, a train ride from Seoul to Busan. That's it. No complex mythology, no heavy exposition. No long explanations about the origin of the outbreak, just a routine journey about to collide with chaos. In the beginning, everything feels normal. Busy stations, passengers boarding, phones ringing. Conversations unfolding like any ordinary day, and right at the center of it all, a father who isn't truly present. Seok-woo is physically there with his daughter, but emotionally, he's somewhere else. Work, calls, deadlines. Even this trip feels more like an obligation than a moment of connection. But the film doesn't waste time. It plants something small, almost easy to miss. A single infected passenger slips onto the train. No alarms, no warning. No dramatic announcement, just one person carrying the beginning of the crisis. And that's what makes the setup so effective, because the outbreak doesn't feel staged. It feels accidental, sudden, uncontrolled, unstoppable. The moment it begins, everything changes. Passengers begin to turn, people panic, order disappears almost instantly, and within minutes the train is no longer transportation. It's a trap. What's brilliant is how quickly the film escalates. There's no slow buildup dragging things out, no unnecessary delay. The infection spreads like a chain reaction, fast, overwhelming, and impossible to contain. One bite, a few seconds. Transformation, and suddenly the rules are clear. At the same time, the outside world is breaking down too. Through windows, news reports, and brief glimpses, you realize this isn't just happening on the train, it's everywhere. Cities in crisis, authorities overwhelmed, confusion spreading just as fast as the infection, and that's where the destination becomes important. Busan, the one place believed to still be safe, or at least safer than everything else. That single idea drives the entire story forward. Not certainty, not guarantees, just hope. The belief that if they can just make it there, they might have a chance. And that's what gives the journey its urgency, because now every second matters. Every carriage becomes a step closer, or further away. Every delay increases the risk. Every decision could mean the difference between reaching Busan or never getting there at all. But the film doesn't rely on complexity to create tension. It keeps the premise stripped down to its core: get to Busan, stay alive. That simplicity is its strength, because it allows everything else, the characters, the emotion, the chaos, to take center stage. At the same time, the setup introduces something deeper. This isn't just about escaping the infected. It's about how people respond when escape feels uncertain, when safety is just a rumor, when survival depends not just on speed, but on choices, and those choices begin almost immediately. Who do you trust? Who do you help? Who do you leave behind? Because from the moment the crisis begins, the train becomes more than just a setting. It becomes a test, a moving situation where every passenger is forced to decide not just how to survive, but who they are when survival is all that matters. That's what makes the premise so powerful. It doesn't overwhelm you with complexity. It doesn't rely on complicated world building. It gives you something simple and then pushes it to its absolute limit: a train, a destination, an outbreak. And a question that grows heavier with every passing mile: will they make it to Busan? And if they do, what will be left of them when they arrive? At the heart of Train to Busan, beneath all the chaos and survival, there's one journey that matters more than any destination: Seok-woo's transformation. Because this isn't a story about a perfect hero rising to the occasion. It's about a flawed man being forced to confront who he really is. When we first meet Seok-woo, he's not a bad person, but he's not a good one either. He's distant, detached, consumed by work. Even when he's with his daughter, he isn't truly present. His priorities are clear: efficiency, success, self-preservation, and emotionally, he's closed off. There's a moment early on that defines him. He advises his daughter to think of herself first, to prioritize survival, to not worry about others. And in a normal world, that might sound practical. but in the world this film is about to create, that mindset becomes something much heavier. Because once the crisis begins, Seok-woo's philosophy starts to break, not immediately. At first, he holds on to it. He looks for safe spaces. He avoids unnecessary risk. He treats survival like a calculation. Who is useful? Who is a threat? Who can be left behind? But then something starts to change. Not because he chooses to change, but because he's forced to. Every time he makes a cold decision, his daughter is watching. Every time he chooses safety over compassion, she feels it. And slowly, that distance between them becomes impossible to ignore. That's where the brilliance of his arc lies. It's not driven by speeches. It's driven by pressure, by guilt, by realization. He begins to see what his daughter already understands, that survival without humanity is empty. And the film doesn't rush this transformation. It builds it step by step, through moments of hesitation, moments of regret, moments where he sees others risking everything for someone else while he's still holding back. Then comes the turning point, the moment where survival is no longer just about staying alive, but about protecting someone else. From that point on, Seok-woo stops being reactive and starts making choices, different choices. Harder choices, more compassionate choices. He begins to open up, to connect, to understand what his daughter truly needs from him, not protection alone but presence. And that's what makes his journey so powerful. Because it's not about becoming stronger, it's about becoming better. By the time the film reaches its final stretch, Seok-woo is no longer the man we met at the beginning. The distance is gone, the cold logic is gone. What remains is something far more vulnerable and far more meaningful. And then comes the moment that defines everything, the moment where his arc reaches its conclusion. When he's infected, when he knows there's no way back, he doesn't panic. He doesn't cling to survival. He makes one final decision, to protect his daughter, at any cost, and in that moment, everything comes full circle. The man who once believed in self-preservation above all else chooses self-sacrifice. That's what makes the scene so devastating. It's not just tragic, it's earned, because this isn't just a character reaching the end of his journey. It's a character completing it, and that's why Seok-woo's arc is the emotional backbone of Train to Busan. Without it, the movie would still be intense, still engaging, still thrilling, but with it, the film becomes something deeper. Something that stays with you, because his story asks a question that goes beyond the crisis, beyond the infected, beyond survival itself. When everything falls apart, when fear takes over, when survival is no longer guaranteed, do you hold on to yourself, or do you finally become the person you were meant to be? In a film filled with urgency, pressure, and relentless danger, there's one presence that quietly holds everything together: Soo-eun. Not with strength, not with control, not with power, but with something far more important: humanity. Because while everyone else is reacting, she's understanding. While adults are calculating survival, she's feeling it, and that difference changes everything. From the very beginning, Soo-eun is not written like a typical child in a crisis story. She's not just there to be protected, she's not just a symbol of innocence. She sees things clearly, more clearly than the adults around her. When others hesitate, she questions. When others panic, she observes. When others choose themselves, she instinctively reaches out to others. And that's what makes her the emotional core of the film. She represents something the world around her is losing: compassion. As the situation intensifies, people begin to close themselves off. Doors are shut, voices rise, fear turns into suspicion, strangers become threats, and survival starts to mean exclusion. But Soo-eun doesn't follow that pattern. She doesn't see people as obstacles, she sees them as people, and that creates a powerful contrast. Because while the adults are becoming more distant, she remains connected. While they're breaking apart, she's holding on. This is where the film becomes deeply emotional, because her presence doesn't just affect the audience, it affects the characters, especially her father. Every decision he makes, she witnesses. Every cold choice she feels. And without saying much, she begins to challenge him, not through confrontation, but through who she is. Her disappointment carries more weight than any argument. Her silence speaks louder than words. And slowly she becomes the mirror he can't avoid. That's the brilliance of her role. She doesn't force change, she reveals the need for it, and at the same time, she gives the audience something to hold on to. Because in a story where everything is collapsing, she represents what's still worth saving. Her emotional authenticity is what makes the film land. When she's scared, you feel it. When she's confused, you understand it. When she's hurting, it feels real. And that's why the emotional moments hit so hard, because they're not built on spectacle, they're built on her reactions, her perspective, her experience. She turns every loss into something heavier. Every sacrifice into something meaningful, every moment of danger into something deeply personal. And by the time the story reaches its most powerful point, it's not just about survival anymore. It's about her, what she's been through. What she's lost, what she still carries forward. Even the final moments of the film are defined by her presence. Not fear, not chaos, but something fragile hope, because Suen represents the idea that even in the most difficult circumstances, humanity can endure. Not through strength, not through control, but through empathy. That's what makes her the true center of the story. Not the crisis, not the action, not even the survival. It's her. Because in a world falling apart, she's the only one who never loses herself. And in the end, that's what makes her the strongest character in Train to Busan. One of the biggest reasons Train to Busan works so powerfully is that it's never just about one story. It's about many lives colliding in one place and how those lives change when survival becomes uncertain. Because this isn't a train full of background characters. These aren't faceless passengers waiting to disappear. Every person on that train feels like they came from somewhere. They have relationships, they have emotions, they have something to lose, and that's exactly what makes the tension hit harder. Take the couple at the center of the film's emotional warmth, the pregnant woman and her husband. He's strong, physically imposing, almost intimidating at first glance, but underneath that strength there's kindness, there's humor, there's love. And the way he protects his wife, not just with force but with care, adds something the film desperately needs: human warmth inside chaos. Then you have the younger couple, caught in the early stages of love, right in the middle of a crisis. Their connection is softer, more uncertain, more fragile, and that's what makes it so emotional, because they're experiencing something new at the most difficult possible time. There are also the elderly sisters, quiet, observant, carrying their own emotional weight. They don't dominate scenes, they don't demand attention, but when their moment comes, it matters. Because the film has taken the time to make them feel real, even the smallest characters, the ones who appear briefly, serve a purpose: a frightened passenger, a hesitant ally, someone who chooses to help or chooses to step back. And together they create something important, a community under pressure. That's where the film becomes more than just survival, because survival here isn't individual, it's collective. People are forced to work together, even when trust is uncertain. They form alliances, they depend on strangers, they move as a group because alone they don't stand a chance. But those relationships are fragile, they can break instantly. One decision, one moment of fear, one self-focused choice, and everything falls apart. That tension between unity and division is constant. Some characters choose to protect others, some choose to protect only themselves. And that contrast drives the emotional core of the film, because the movie keeps asking, what does it mean to stand together, when standing together might put you at risk? And that's why the ensemble matters so much. Each character represents a different response to crisis: courage, fear, love, self-interest, sacrifice. You're not just watching a group trying to survive, you're watching a society in miniature breaking apart and trying to hold itself together at the same time. What makes it even more effective is how quickly the film builds these relationships. It doesn't spend hours on backstories. It doesn't slow down the narrative. Instead, it uses small moments, a look, a gesture, a line of dialogue to establish connection. And somehow that's enough. Enough for you to care. Enough for you to feel the loss. Enough for every sacrifice to resonate. Because when something happens to these characters, it doesn't feel random. It feels meaningful. That's the power of the ensemble. It turns the film from a sequence of intense moments into an emotional experience. Without these relationships, the movie would still be fast, still gripping, still engaging. But with them, it becomes personal. Because now every decision matters. Every betrayal leaves an impact. Every act of courage carries weight. And every time someone is lost, it doesn't feel like part of the plot. It feels like losing a piece of the story itself. That's why Train to Busan stands out. It doesn't just show people trying to survive together. It shows how difficult it is to stay human together when everything is falling apart. In most outbreak-driven films, the threat is obvious. It's the infected, the ones chasing you, the ones forcing their way through barriers, the ones turning everyone they reach. But Train to Busan introduces a different kind of danger, one that doesn't sprint, one that doesn't make noise, one that doesn't look like a threat at all: Dong-seok. Because while the infected represent chaos, Dong-seok represents something far more uncomfortable: fear without a moral boundary. At first, he doesn't seem like the main threat. He's just another passenger, anxious, panicked, trying to survive like everyone else. But very quickly, you start to see the difference. When others hesitate, he pushes forward. When others consider helping, he refuses. When others see people, he sees obstacles. And that's what makes him dangerous. Not his strength, not his intelligence, but his mindset. Because Dong-seok doesn't just want to survive, he wants to survive at any cost. And that cost. Other people, time and time again, he makes the same choice: close the door, leave someone behind, protect himself even if it means putting others at risk. At first it feels like panic, a natural reaction, fear taking control. But then it keeps happening, again and again and again, and suddenly it's no longer just fear, it's a pattern, a belief. That survival justifies everything. That's when he stops being just a character and becomes a statement. Because Dong-seok represents something real, something we recognize, the person who, in a crisis, stops seeing people as equals and starts ranking them. Who matters, who doesn't, who deserves to be protected, who can be left behind. And the most unsettling part, he doesn't see himself as the villain. In his mind, he's being logical, efficient, necessary. That's what makes him so effective. Because he reflects a truth the film keeps circling back to, that fear doesn't just create victims, it creates justification. He becomes the human version of the outbreak, spreading distrust, spreading division, spreading panic, and just like the infection, his influence spreads. People begin questioning each other, doubting each other, turning against each other. Because fear is contagious, and Dong-seok carries it. At times, his behavior feels extreme, almost pushed to the edge, but that's intentional. He's not meant to be subtle, he's meant to expose something. The worst-case version of what happens when self-preservation becomes the only rule. And yet, the film gives him something unexpected, moments where you understand him, not agree with him, but understand him. Because underneath all that self-interest, there's fear, raw, overwhelming fear, and that's what makes his character so uncomfortable. Because it raises a question no one wants to answer. In the same situation, how different would we really be? That's the role he plays in the story. He's not just there to create conflict. He's there to challenge the idea of morality itself. Because while the infected are trying to break into the train, Dong-seok is breaking something else, trust. And once that's gone, the group is no longer united. That's when survival becomes harder, more chaotic, more uncertain. Because now the threat isn't just outside the door, it's inside, standing among them. That's what makes Train to Busan more than just a survival story. It doesn't just ask how to move past the infected, it asks how to survive each other. And Dong-seok is the answer to that question, the darkest possible one. Because in the end, the most unsettling thing isn't how fast the infected move, it's how quickly fear can reshape a human being into something just as dangerous. You can have a great concept, you can have intense action, you can have a perfectly designed setting, but none of it matters if the performances don't make you believe. And that's where Train to Busan truly elevates itself, because every major moment in this film, every sacrifice, every loss, every surge of panic lands because of the performances. At the center is Gong Yoo as Seok-woo, and what he does with this character is quietly powerful. He doesn't play a hero. He plays a man who's emotionally distant, reserved, practical, almost cold. In the beginning, his reactions are controlled, measured. Even when things start going wrong, he's still thinking in terms of strategy, survival, efficiency. But as the situation worsens, you start to see the cracks, not through dramatic speeches, not through sudden breakdowns, but through small shifts, a hesitation, a look, a moment of realization. And that's what makes his performance so effective. It's internal, it builds gradually. By the time the story reaches its emotional peak, he's no longer the same person. And you don't need to be told that. You feel it. Then there's Kim Soo-won as Soo-won, and this is where the film becomes something special. Because child performances in high-intensity films can be unpredictable, but here, it's one of the strongest elements of the entire movie. She doesn't overact. She doesn't rely on exaggerated emotion. Everything feels natural. When she's scared, you believe it. When she's confused, you understand it. When she's hurting, it resonates deeply. And that authenticity is what anchors the entire story. Without her, the emotional core wouldn't work the same way. Then you have Dong-seok, the physical presence of the film. At first, he comes across as intimidating, strong, direct, unfiltered, but very quickly you realize he's the heart. He brings warmth, humor, humanity. His interactions, especially with his wife, add a layer of emotional depth that balances the tension. And when it matters most, he delivers some of the film's most impactful moments. Then there's Young Yoo-mi, quiet, vulnerable, and grounded. She represents fear, hope, and resilience all at once. And Kim Yoo-sung, who fully commits to one of the most frustrating characters in the film. His performance is deliberately sharp, uncomfortable, relentless. He doesn't hold back. And that's exactly why the character works. Even the younger cast, Choi Woo-shik and Ahn So-hee, bring a surprising level of sincerity. Their relationship adds softness to a story filled with pressure. And their reactions make the situation feel even more real. What makes all of these performances stand out is commitment. No one feels like they're just playing a role. Everyone feels like they're inside the situation. Reacting in real time, the fear feels immediate, the urgency feels real, the emotion feels earned. Even in the most chaotic scenes, the performances never get lost, and that's rare for a film like this. Because when intensity rises, performances often fade into the background, but here they don't. They drive the story forward. That's why the film works on two levels. On the surface, it's intense, fast, and visually engaging. But underneath, it's powered by people you care about. And that care comes directly from the performances. Because when characters feel real, their choices matter. Their sacrifices matter. Their losses matter. And suddenly, this isn't just a genre film anymore. It's a story about people. And the actors make sure you never forget that. There are two kinds of thrillers, the ones that move fast and the ones that feel fast. Train to Busan does both, and that's why its pacing is one of its greatest strengths. From the moment the train departs, the film is already building tension, not through action, but through unease, small details, strange behavior. Fragments of information that don't quite make sense yet. You feel it before you see it. Something isn't right, and the film doesn't rush that feeling. It lets it settle just enough so when the outbreak begins, it hits with full impact. Because once it starts, there's no turning back. The film shifts gears almost instantly, from calm to urgency, from normal to survival, and what's impressive is how quickly it locks into momentum. There's no long delay. No drawn-out setup. Within minutes, the entire situation escalates beyond control. But here's the key, it's not just fast, it's structured, because pacing isn't about constant speed, it's about rhythm. And Train to Busan understands that perfectly. The film moves in waves. You get a surge of intensity, urgency, movement, confrontation, chaos. Then, just for a moment, it pulls back, a breath, a conversation, a realization. Just enough time to feel what just happened before everything begins again. And that pattern repeats, building higher each time. The stakes increase, the spaces shrink, the options disappear, and with each wave, the pressure tightens. That's why the film never feels exhausting, because it knows when to push and when to pause. Those pauses aren't breaks, they're setup. They allow emotions to land, they allow characters to evolve. They allow the audience to process before being pulled back into tension. And then when the next sequence arrives, it feels even more intense. Another thing the film does brilliantly is escalation. It doesn't repeat the same type of scene. It evolves them. Early on, it's confusion, people trying to understand what's happening. Then it becomes survival, moving from one carriage to another, finding temporary safety. Then it becomes strategy, planning movements, using the environment, taking calculated risks, and by the final stretch, it becomes desperation. There are no safe options left, no easy choices, no guarantees. Every movement feels like it could be the last. That progression is what keeps the film engaging, because it never feels stuck. It's always moving forward, just like the train itself. Even structurally, the film is tight. Each carriage feels like a new chapter. Each stop introduces a new challenge. Each sequence builds on the last, and all of it is leading toward one destination, Busan. That destination isn't just physical, it's emotional. Because as the film moves forward, so do the characters. They change, they adapt, they struggle, they grow, and the pacing reflects that. By the time you reach the final act, everything feels heavier, not slower but more meaningful. Because now it's not just about survival, it's about what that survival has cost. And that's why the runtime never feels long, because the film is constantly engaging you physically, emotionally, psychologically. There's always something happening, always something at stake, always a reason to stay invested. Even when you think things might calm down, they don't. The film finds another way to push forward, another way to raise the tension, another way to remind you that there's no real escape. That's the genius of its pacing. It mirrors the journey itself, relentless, unstoppable, always moving forward, whether the characters are ready or not. And by the time the train reaches its final stop, you realize something important. You didn't just watch the story unfold. You were carried through it, at full speed, with no time to look away. And that's what great pacing does. It doesn't just tell a story, it pulls you inside it and doesn't let go. In most outbreak-driven films, tension builds gradually. You sense the danger approaching. You hear it before it reaches you. You have time to think, time to react. Train to Busan takes a completely different approach, because here, the threat doesn't approach, it arrives instantly. The infected in this film are not slow. They don't drift. They don't hesitate. They surge forward, fast, sudden, relentless. The moment someone turns, it's immediate. No extended delay, no prolonged buildup, just a sudden shift from human to something uncontrollable, and that speed changes everything. Because now survival isn't about planning ahead, it's about reacting in seconds, sometimes less. You don't have time to process fear, you're already inside it. That's what makes these infected so effective. They don't create distant tension. They create instant urgency, but it's not just speed, it's how they move. There's something unnatural about it, jerky, aggressive, unpredictable. They don't just run, they lunge, they twist, they collapse and rise again with intense energy. And when they come together, they don't move like individuals. They move like a force. They surge, they climb over each other. They crash into barriers, into glass, into anything in their path like a wave with no hesitation. And in a confined space, that wave becomes overwhelming. That's where the action design becomes exceptional, because every encounter feels different. This isn't repetitive confrontation, it's evolving danger. One moment, it's a narrow corridor. No space to move, no room to respond, just pressure closing in. Next, it's a sealed door, tension building, hands striking against the glass. The question isn't if it will give way, it's when. Then darkness, the infected hesitate. Their behavior shifts. Suddenly, survival becomes strategy. Timing matters, movement matters, silence matters. And just when you think you understand the rules, the film changes them again. That's what keeps the action unpredictable. It's not just about avoiding the infected, it's about understanding the environment, using space, using timing, using every possible advantage, even if it lasts only seconds, and those seconds are everything. The choreography of these sequences is precise and controlled. Even in chaos, you understand what's happening. You see who's trapped, who's escaping, who's about to be overwhelmed. That clarity is essential, because it allows tension to build without confusion. You're not observing the action, you're inside it, and the film constantly raises the stakes. Early on, it's one infected, then a few, then suddenly an entire carriage, a surge. A wall of bodies moving toward you with unstoppable force. And by the later stages, it's no longer about avoiding individual encounters. It's about enduring entire waves. That escalation is what makes the action feel so intense. It doesn't stay at one level, it grows, it expands, it becomes harder to contain. And at the same time, the film doesn't rely purely on scale. Yes, there are large moments, mass movement, overwhelming pressure. But the real tension comes from proximity, how close the infected are, how little space exists between safety and danger, how quickly a situation can collapse, because in this film, risk is never distant, it's right there. Reaching for you, that's what makes the action so effective. It's not just visually intense, it's physically felt. You feel the pressure, the urgency, the lack of control. And even when characters push forward, even when they find temporary success, there's always a sense that they're barely holding on. That's the key difference. This isn't action where the heroes dominate, it's action where survival is fragile. Every success is temporary, every safe space is unstable, every plan can fail in seconds. And that's what makes the threat in Train to Busan so memorable. It's not just about how dangerous the infected are, it's about how quickly they take control, how completely they overwhelm, and how little time there is to respond before everything changes. Because in the end, the most unsettling thing isn't just how fast they move, it's how quickly they reshape everything. A film like Train to Busan doesn't succeed on concept alone. You can have a strong idea, you can have compelling characters, you can even have intense sequences, but if the technical execution fails, the entire experience falls apart. And this is where the film proves just how carefully crafted it really is, because behind all the urgency, there's precision. Let's start with the cinematography. What makes the visuals so effective is how they constantly reinforce one feeling: confinement. The camera doesn't just show you the train, it locks you inside it. Tight corridors, low ceilings, bodies pressed together. You feel the lack of space, you feel the pressure. Even when the camera pulls back, showing the train racing across open landscapes, there's a contrast. Freedom outside, confinement inside. That visual contrast quietly reminds you there's no way out. Overhead shots matter too. They reveal just how little room the characters actually have. How quickly space disappears when the infected surge forward. How easily a safe area becomes a trap. And then there's the close-up work. Faces under pressure, eyes searching for exits, hands gripping doors that may not hold. These shots bring the tension down to a human level, because the film never lets you forget this isn't just spectacle, it's personal. Now let's talk about the editing. In a film this fast, clarity is everything. And Train to Busan handles that beautifully. Even during the most chaotic sequences, you always understand what's happening, who's moving, where they're going, what the danger is. That might sound simple, but it's incredibly difficult to achieve, because chaos without clarity becomes noise, and this film never becomes noise. Instead, the editing creates rhythm. Fast cuts during attacks, sharp, urgent, disorienting. Then slower transitions, giving just enough room for emotion to land. That balance keeps the film engaging. It never overwhelms you, but it never lets you settle either. Now, the action staging. Every sequence feels deliberate. Confrontations aren't random. Movements aren't messy just for the sake of looking messy. There's structure, direction, purpose. Characters move through space with intention, whether it's pushing through a carriage, holding a door, or timing an escape. And because of that, every action scene feels grounded, even when it's intense, even when it's chaotic. Then there's the use of visual effects. The film does something smart here. It doesn't rely on them too heavily. Yes, there's CGI. You see it in large swarms, in bodies piling over each other, in moments where the scale needs to expand, but it's used to support the action, not replace it. The physical performances still carry the weight. The movement still feels tangible, and that's why the infected feel so convincing, because they're not just digital creations, they're physical threats enhanced by technology. Of course, there are moments where the CGI isn't flawless. A few sequences feel slightly heightened, a few visual beats repeat, but they never pull you out of the experience, because the foundation is strong. The sound design and overall technical layering also deserve attention. The pounding footsteps, the sudden cries, the impact of bodies slamming into surfaces, everything is designed to make you feel the intensity, not just see it. And then there's the pacing of the visuals themselves. The film knows when to go big and when to go small. Large-scale chaos when it needs to, then suddenly tight, suffocating close-ups. That shift keeps the experience dynamic. It prevents visual fatigue. It keeps you engaged. All of this comes together to create something important: control. Even in its most chaotic moments, the film feels controlled. Every shot has purpose. Every cut has timing. Every sequence has direction. And that's what separates it from weaker entries in the genre. Because without that level of technical precision, the tension wouldn't land, the action wouldn't feel real, the emotion wouldn't hit as hard. But here, everything works together. The cinematography traps you, the editing guides you, the action drives you forward, the effects strengthen the experience, and as a result, you're not just watching the story, you're inside it, feeling every movement, every impact. Every moment of pressure. That's what great technical craft does. It disappears, not because it's invisible, but because it's so effective you stop noticing it, and all that remains is the experience. In most thrillers, the environment is just a backdrop, a place where things happen, a setting that holds the story together. But in Train to Busan, the environment isn't passive, it's active. It shapes every decision, it controls every movement. It influences who makes it through and who doesn't, because this isn't just a train, it's a system. A system of doors, corridors, windows, tunnels, compartments, each one becoming a tool or a trap. And the film uses every part of it. Take the doors, for example. In a normal setting, a door is simple: open or closed, safe or not. But here, a door becomes a moral decision. Do you open it and risk letting danger in? Or do you keep it shut and leave someone behind? And suddenly, survival isn't just physical, it's ethical. Then there are the corridors: narrow, restrictive, unforgiving. There's no room to respond properly, no space to escape cleanly. Every movement is limited, every mistake is punished instantly. You can't easily outmaneuver the threat, you can only force your way through it, and that creates a completely different kind of tension. Now add the windows. They show you the outside world, but they don't give you access to it. You see cities unraveling, you see chaos spreading, you see what's happening beyond the train, but you can't reach it. That separation creates a powerful feeling. You're moving, but you're trapped. Then come the tunnels. Darkness changes everything. Suddenly, visibility drops, the infected hesitate, their behavior shifts, and for a brief moment, the balance changes. Survivors can move, plan, breathe. But only for seconds, because the darkness doesn't remove the threat, it delays it. And when the light returns, so does the danger. That constant shift between visibility and blindness becomes a weapon. The film doesn't just show you the environment, it makes you understand how to use it. Every sequence becomes a problem to solve. How do you cross a carriage filled with infected? How do you distract them? How do you move without being noticed? And those answers always come from the environment. Even something as simple as spacing becomes critical. How far away are they? How quickly can you move? How long before they reach you? Seconds matter, inches matter, timing matters, and the film builds entire sequences around that. It's not just action, it's strategy. The characters aren't just reacting, they're adapting, using what's around them, turning limitations into advantages, even if those advantages only last for a moment, because nothing in this environment stays safe. A compartment can protect you until it doesn't. A door can hold until it gives way. A tunnel can hide you until the light returns. That unpredictability keeps the tension alive. You never feel comfortable. You never feel secure, because the environment itself keeps changing the rules. And that's what makes the film so engaging. It's not just about surviving the infected. It's about understanding the space you're in, because the train doesn't forgive mistakes. It's narrow, it's fast, it's unforgiving. And every part of it, from the doors to the tunnels, is constantly testing the characters. That's why the suspense feels so real, because it's not just built on danger, it's built on interaction. The characters and the environment are constantly shaping each other. Every move has a consequence, every choice has a cost, and every space can turn against you. That's the genius of Train to Busan. It doesn't just place its characters inside a dangerous world, it makes the world itself part of the danger. One of the hardest things for any film to get right is tone, especially in a story like this. Because Train to Busan isn't just one kind of movie. It's suspense, it's action, it's drama, it's a large-scale crisis film, and at times it's even quietly funny. Balancing all of that, that's incredibly difficult. Lean too much into suspense and you lose emotional connection. Lean too much into drama and you lose momentum. Lean too much into action and it becomes empty spectacle. But this film manages to hold all of it together. And that's what makes it feel so alive. At its core, the film is intense, relentless, unforgiving. The threat is constant, the pace is fast, the danger never feels far away. But what makes that intensity work is what the film places around it. Moments of quiet, moments of connection, moments where characters are just human, a conversation between characters, a small act of kindness, a brief exchange that brings a touch of humor into the chaos. These moments don't slow the film down, they strengthen it, because without them, the tension would become overwhelming. Instead, the film gives you just enough space to feel, and then it pulls you right back into urgency. That balance creates a rhythm: fear, then relief, connection, then loss, hope, then panic, and each shift makes the next one more powerful. When something emotional happens, it resonates more deeply because the film has built toward it. When something intense happens, it feels stronger because you've just experienced something human. That contrast is essential, because the film never lets you stay in one emotional space for too long. Just when you think you understand the tone, it changes. A moment of warmth reminds you that these are real people. Then suddenly, that moment is gone, replaced by urgency, and that unpredictability keeps you engaged. It also makes the characters feel real, because in real life, even in the most difficult situations, people still laugh, still connect, still try to hold on to something familiar, and the film captures that. It doesn't treat tension and humanity as opposites. It lets them exist side by side. That's why the emotional scenes don't feel forced. They grow naturally out of the story, out of the relationships, out of the pressure the characters are under. Even the action sequences reflect this balance. They're intense but never empty. Every movement is tied to someone. Every risk has meaning. Every moment of danger connects back to the people involved. And that's what keeps the film grounded. It never becomes just spectacle. It never becomes just emotion. It stays in between, and that's where it's strongest, because the film understands something important. That tension works best when you care about what's at stake. That action matters more when it protects something meaningful, and that emotional moments resonate most when they emerge from pressure. That's the balance Train to Busan achieves. It doesn't separate its tones, it blends them. And in doing so, it creates something that feels complete, a film that can make you tense, then reflective, then hopeful, then deeply affected, sometimes within the same sequence. And by the time it ends, you realize something. You weren't just watching suspense. You weren't just watching action. You were experiencing a story that knew exactly how to guide your emotions and exactly when to shift them. That's not easy. But when it works like it does here, it makes the entire film unforgettable. When people hear outbreak film, they usually expect one thing: graphic intensity, extreme visuals, heavy detail, shock for the sake of shock. And Train to Busan could have taken that route. It had every reason to: fast-moving, infected, close quarters encounters, constant urgency. It could have leaned entirely into excess, but instead it makes a smarter choice. It shows impact without depending on it, because this film understands something important. You don't need to show everything to make the audience feel everything. Yes, there are intense moments. Yes, there are high-stakes encounters. People are overwhelmed, separated, pulled away. The danger is real. The threat is physical, but the film doesn't dwell on it. It doesn't pause to highlight every detail. It doesn't try to overwhelm with excess. Instead, it focuses on impact. What matters isn't how graphic a moment is, it's how it feels. And that feeling comes from context, from tension, from connection. When someone is in danger, you're not focused on visuals. You're focused on whether they make it through. When someone is lost, you're not thinking about the event itself. You're thinking about what it means. That's the difference. The film shifts the focus from what happens physically to what it means emotionally. And because of that, every intense moment carries weight. A single bite isn't just an encounter, it's a countdown. A transformation isn't just a visual change, it's the loss of a person. An ending isn't just an event, it's a consequence. And that restraint makes everything stronger, because when intensity is constant and excessive, it loses its effect. It becomes background noise. But here, every moment stands out. Every encounter feels dangerous. Every close call feels real. Every loss feels meaningful. Even the way the infected are presented reflects this balance. They're fast, aggressive, unpredictable, but the film doesn't rely on graphic detail to make them effective. It relies on movement, on energy, On proximity, you don't need to see everything to feel the threat. In fact, what you don't see often makes it more powerful. The sound of impact, the reaction of a character, the sudden shift from safety to danger, all of that builds tension without excess. And that choice also makes the film more accessible. Viewers who might usually avoid intense films can still experience this story. Because the fear here isn't built on discomfort, it's built on pressure, on the feeling that something is closing in, that time is running out, that safety is temporary. That's what makes it effective, and that's why the intensity never feels empty. It always serves the story, it always connects back to the characters, it always has meaning. Even in the most intense sequences, the film never loses control. It never becomes overwhelming just for the sake of it. It never leans into excess just to shock. It stays focused. And that restraint is what gives the film its emotional strength. Because when the story reaches its most powerful moments, you're not overwhelmed by visuals. You're overwhelmed by feeling. And that's the difference between intensity that shocks and intensity that stays with you. Train to Busan chooses the second. And because of that, it doesn't just show you tension, it makes you feel it. Stories centered around outbreaks have existed for decades. From slow, atmospheric classics to fast, large-scale modern interpretations, the genre has explored almost every direction. Which makes one question unavoidable: where does Train to Busan fit within all of this? Because on the surface, it's not completely reinventing the formula. It still has the outbreak, the infected, the survivors, the race against time. These are familiar elements, we've seen them before, but what makes the film stand out is how it repositions those elements. Let's start with the infected. Traditionally, they were slow, methodical, symbolic. The classic version built tension through inevitability. Then came a shift, faster, more aggressive, more immediate. Films like World War Z expanded the scale, turning infected groups into overwhelming waves. Train to Busan takes that speed, but brings it into a confined space. Instead of wide cities and open environments, it traps that intensity inside a train, and that changes everything. Now the threat isn't distant, it's immediate. Close, unavoidable. That alone places the film in a unique position, but it doesn't stop there. Structurally, the film feels closer to classic disaster stories, narratives where a group of strangers are thrown into a crisis and forced to navigate it together. Different personalities, different values, different reactions under pressure. Train to Busan follows that same idea, but replaces natural disaster with a human-driven one. Then there's the emotional comparison. Unlike lighter entries such as Zombieland, which lean into humor and tone, this film leans heavily into emotional weight. It's not trying to entertain through irony, it's trying to connect. At the same time, it avoids becoming overly abstract or distant. Some stories in this genre dive deep into symbolism and layered themes. Train to Busan keeps things accessible. It delivers its ideas through characters, through actions, through relationships, not through heavy exposition. That balance matters, because it allows the film to reach a wider audience without losing its depth. There are also comparisons to confined, socially layered stories like Snowpiercer, where a moving train reflects society itself. Different classes, different power structures, different levels of control, and while Train to Busan doesn't explore those ideas in the same structured way, they're still present. Class tension, self-focused leadership, division under pressure, all unfolding inside a confined, forward-moving space. Even within long-form storytelling like The Walking Dead, you see similar themes of survival, trust, and human conflict. But Train to Busan compresses all of that into a single, relentless journey. No extended timelines, no drawn-out world building, just immediate pressure, from start to finish. That's what gives it its identity. It doesn't try to be the biggest. It doesn't try to be the most complex. It focuses on execution, and that's why many consider it one of the strongest modern entries in the genre, because it takes familiar ideas and refines them. It doesn't reinvent the format, it perfects a version of it, fast, intense, emotionally grounded, tightly structured, and when compared to larger franchise-style entries like Resident Evil, it stands apart in one key way. It cares deeply about its characters. The action isn't just spectacle, the danger isn't just visual, everything connects back to people, and that's what gives it lasting impact. Because in the end, genres evolve not just through new ideas, but through stronger execution. And Train to Busan proves that even in a familiar genre, there's still room to create something that feels fresh. Something that respects what came before, but stands confidently on its own path. Every film has a concept, every film has actors, every film has action, but what truly defines a movie like Train to Busan is the person behind it. Yoon Sang-ho, because this film could have easily been just another outbreak story, a familiar premise, a confined setting, a predictable structure, but under his direction, it becomes something else, something controlled, something focused, something purposeful, and that's what stands out immediately. This is his live-action debut, and yet it doesn't feel like a first attempt. There's confidence in every decision, the way the story moves, the way tension builds, the way space is used. The way emotion is layered into intensity, nothing feels accidental. From the very beginning, he understands exactly what kind of film he's making, not just a suspense-driven story, but a character-centered journey. And that focus shapes everything. He doesn't rely on spectacle alone. He doesn't overload the film with unnecessary complexity. Instead, he takes a simple idea and pushes it to its limit. That's one of his greatest strengths. The premise is stripped down, an outbreak on a train, but the execution is anything but simple. Every sequence is designed to escalate. Every moment builds on the last. Every scene has purpose. That's direction, and you feel it in the pacing. The film never drifts, it never loses momentum, but it also never forgets to pause. He knows when to slow things down, when to let characters interact, when to allow emotion to surface, and then when to pull the audience right back into urgency. That balance is incredibly difficult. Lean too far into action, and the film becomes empty. Lean too far into emotion, and the tension fades, but he holds both together. Another major strength is how he uses space. A train is a limited environment. It could easily feel repetitive, but under his direction, it becomes dynamic. Each carriage feels distinct. Each location introduces new challenges. Each movement through space feels meaningful. That's not just writing, that's visual storytelling, and it connects directly to his background. Before this film, he worked in animation, and you can see that influence. The way large-scale sequences are structured, the way movement flows across the screen, the way tension builds visually. There's a sense of motion, of rhythm, that feels incredibly precise, but it stays grounded. He combines scale with physical intensity. So even the largest moments still feel real. Then there's his control over tone. He doesn't treat the film as just one genre. He blends suspense, action, drama, emotional storytelling, and somehow it all feels cohesive. That's not easy because shifting tone can disrupt a film, but here it strengthens it. He allows moments of humor, moments of warmth, moments of connection, without ever losing the tension, and that's what makes the film feel complete. Perhaps most importantly, he understands characters. The action is strong, the tension is high, but the reason the film works is because you care about the people inside it, and that comes from direction. From knowing when to focus on a face instead of scale, from knowing when silence matters more than noise, from understanding that emotion is what gives intensity meaning. Even the minor flaws, familiar tropes, or small inconsistencies are held together by his control. Because the film never loses its identity, it knows what it is, and it fully commits to it. That's what separates a good film from a memorable one, not perfection, but clarity of vision, and Yoon Sang-ho delivers that. He takes a genre many people think they understand and shows how much more it can offer, not by reinventing everything, but by executing everything at a higher level, by focusing on detail, on pacing, on emotion, on control. And in doing so, he doesn't just create an outbreak film. He creates a story that stays with you. Because in the end, great direction isn't about what you show, it's about how you make people feel. And Train to Busan proves that in the hands of the right director, even the simplest idea can become something unforgettable. When a film leaves a lasting impact, one story isn't always enough. And that's exactly what happened with Train to Busan, because the world it created felt larger than a single journey, a widespread crisis, a society under pressure, countless stories unfolding beyond the train. And naturally, that world began to expand. Before the events on the train, there's Seoul Station, an animated prequel that explores what happened before everything spiraled out of control, the early stages of the outbreak, the confusion. The uncertainty spreading through the city, it shifts the perspective. Instead of a confined train, you see the situation from the outside, different characters, different struggles, but the same world, and that adds context. It shows that what happens on the train is just one part of a much larger event. Then the story continues with Train to Busan Presence, Peninsula, a follow-up set years after the original. Here, the focus shifts again. From immediate survival to the aftermath, what happens when everything has already changed? When society isn't collapsing but already transformed, it expands the scale. Larger environments, more action. Different characters navigating a changed world. Together, these stories create something bigger than a single film. They form a connected universe, a broader exploration of the same crisis from different perspectives. But here's the key: you don't need any of them to appreciate the original. Train to Busan stands completely on its own. Its story is self-contained. Its emotional journey is complete. Its impact doesn't rely on anything else. And that's rare because many extended worlds depend on continuation, on connections, on setting up future stories. But here, the expansion feels optional. It adds depth, it adds perspective. But it doesn't take anything away from the original experience. If anything, it highlights just how strong that original story is, because even as the world expands, the train remains the most powerful part of it. The place where everything came together, the place where the themes resonated the most. That's what defines a successful expanded universe. Not just more content, but a strong foundation. A story compelling enough to make you want to see more. And Train to Busan delivers exactly that. It builds a world that feels alive, even beyond what we see on screen. A world where the outbreak isn't just a moment, but an ongoing reality. And while the story continues to expand, it all traces back to that one journey, that one train. That one story that proved there was so much more to explore. Because sometimes, a single ride is enough to change everything. And sometimes, it's just the beginning. Every journey needs an ending, but not every ending stays with you. Train to Busan doesn't just end, it lands. Because by the time the train reaches its final stretch, this is no longer just a story about survival. It's emotional, it's personal, it carries weight. Everything that began as urgency has now turned into consequence. Fewer people remain, the space feels emptier, the silence feels heavier, and suddenly every step forward matters. This is where the film shifts. The movement is still there. The danger is still present, but something else takes over finality, because now it's not just about reaching Busan, it's about what it took to get there, and what was lost along the way. The most powerful moment centers on Seok-woo. Infected, aware, running out of time, and in that moment everything becomes clear. There's no way back for him, no last-second solution, no miracle, just one final decision, to protect his daughter. Not because he has to, but because he chooses to, and that's what makes it so impactful, because this isn't just an ending, it's the completion of his journey. The man who once believed in self-preservation above all else lets go. And in doing so becomes exactly the person he needed to be. That's why the moment resonates so deeply. It's not just emotional, it's earned. Every decision, every mistake, every moment of growth leads here. And when it happens, it doesn't feel sudden, it feels inevitable. Then comes the aftermath. The survivors, exhausted, changed, carrying everything that has happened. They reach the final point, but there's no sense of victory, only uncertainty. Only silence, and then one last moment of tension. Armed soldiers, a decision about to be made. For a brief second, everything hangs in the balance, and then release. A quiet, fragile relief, not celebration, not triumph. Just continuation, and that's what defines the ending. It doesn't reward the characters in a conventional way. It doesn't offer complete closure. It gives them something smaller but more honest, a chance to move forward. That's why the impact lingers, because the film doesn't pretend everything is resolved. It shows that survival comes with a cost. Loss, grief, change, and those don't disappear when the journey ends. They remain. That's what makes the ending so effective. It doesn't rely on spectacle. It relies on emotion, on everything the film has built up to that point. And whether you see it as powerful or slightly sentimental, it's impossible to ignore, because it leaves you with something, a feeling. A question: was survival enough? Was it worth the cost? And what does it mean to move forward after everything has changed? That's the lasting impact of Train to Busan. Not just the memory of what happened, but the weight of what it meant. Because long after the train stops, the story continues within you. So after everything, the urgency, the action, the emotion, the sacrifice, what is Train to Busan really? On the surface, it's an outbreak film, fast-moving, infected. Relentless pacing, a desperate fight to make it through. All the expected elements are there. But if you stop there, you miss what makes it truly stand out. Because this film isn't defined by its genre, it's defined by how it uses it. It takes something familiar and elevates it, not by rewriting every rule, but by executing every element at a higher level. The pacing keeps you fully engaged. The setting creates constant pressure. The movement feels immediate and intense, but none of that would matter without what lies beneath. The characters, the relationships, the emotional core. That's what gives the film its weight, because this isn't just about escaping danger. It's about what that danger reveals. Fear, self-interest, compassion, sacrifice, all of it exposed under the most extreme conditions. And that's why the film stays with you, not because of the infected, not because of the action, but because of the choices. Who reaches out, who turns away, who gives everything, who makes it through, and what those choices reveal about them. Yes, the film uses familiar elements. It leans into emotion. It stretches realism at times. But none of that takes away from what it achieves, because at its best, Train to Busan becomes something more. A tightly constructed thriller, a character-driven drama, a reflection of human behavior, all moving forward together on the same track, and that's what makes it stand out. It doesn't try to be everything. It focuses, it commits, it delivers, and in doing so, it becomes one of the most memorable entries in its genre. Not because it changes the rules, but because it shows how powerful those rules can be when used with precision. By the time it ends, you're not just thinking about what happened, you're thinking about what it meant, about the cost of survival, about the value of connection, about the kind of person you would be in the same situation, and that's the final impact, because great films don't just entertain, they leave something behind, a feeling, a question, a reflection. And Train to Busan does exactly that. It begins as a journey, but by the end, it becomes something you carry with you, long after the ride is over.